Emily Parker lived just outside Vancouver, in a beautiful, quiet neighborhood where the trees stood tall and the streets always smelled like rain. On the outside, everything about her life looked picture perfect. She had a well-paying job in a design firm, a handsome husband named Jason, and a lovely house with white shutters and a cozy porch swing. But inside the walls of that home, something had broken. The love that once filled the air between her and Jason had slowly faded, like a candle that had been burning too long. They no longer laughed together. They barely touched. And most nights, Emily sat by herself at the dinner table, her plate untouched, while Jason sent one more email, or came home late without explanation. It wasn't always this way. When they got married 9 years ago, Emily believed they would grow old side by side, always putting each other first. But Jason had changed. His work in corporate law had consumed him. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing her not just with his eyes, but with his heart. She missed his smile, his warmth, the way he used to hold her like he was afraid to let go. Now, even when they shared a bed, it felt like miles stretched between them. Then one Friday afternoon in early spring, Jason called her from work. He said his younger brother Ethan was flying in from Denver and needed a place to stay for a few days. He had a photography project nearby. Emily remembered Ethan from their wedding. He was a few years younger than Jason, charming, full of jokes, and had that carefree, adventurous spirit she used to admire. She hadn't seen him in years. When Ethan arrived that evening, everything in the house shifted. He walked in with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a grin that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. He hugged her like he meant it. His voice had a warmth Jason's had long since lost. Over dinner, he asked her questions about her work, her art, even her dreams, things Jason hadn't asked in years. And when she laughed at one of his stories, it came out too easily, like her heart had been waiting for a reason. Over the next few days, Ethan's presence brought life back into the house. He made coffee in the mornings and sat across from her at breakfast, telling her stories from his travels: Kenya, Iceland, Peru. He noticed the little things: her favorite tea, her chipped nail polish, the way she looked out the window when she thought no one was watching. And every time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, something warm, unfamiliar, and impossible to ignore. One evening, Jason texted that he'd be late again. Emily opened a bottle of red wine, planning to drink it alone, but Ethan offered to keep her company. They sat in the kitchen, soft music playing in the background, rain tapping on the windows. The room felt smaller, quieter, more intimate. As she poured a second glass, Ethan looked at her not just with his eyes, but with a kind of quiet understanding that made her chest ache. "You seem like someone who's forgotten how to smile," he said softly. The words hit her like a wave. Her throat tightened. She turned away, trying to hide the tears that burned her eyes. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know why she wanted to cry so badly. But she knew in that moment something had started. Something dangerous. Something beautiful. Something she hadn't felt in years. And deep down, Emily knew her heart had begun to wake up. The rain had passed, but something else had stayed in the air between Emily and Ethan, something unspoken, warm, and impossible to ignore. After that quiet night in the kitchen, Emily found herself waking up earlier just to catch Ethan before he headed out with his camera. He had always been that free-spirited, wild-hearted kind of man, the kind who chased sunsets and talked about the way light hit a mountain as if it meant something sacred. And maybe it did, to someone like him. Emily hadn't felt sacred in a long time, but when Ethan looked at her, it was like he saw something she didn't even recognize in herself anymore. They started going for morning walks around the nearby lake, a quiet spot surrounded by tall pines and fog that clung to the water like a secret. He brought his camera, of course, but more often than not, he ended up watching her instead. He asked her about her past, what she wanted before marriage, before life became about holding things together. She told him shyly that she used to paint landscapes mostly, she said, but I stopped. It felt silly after a while. He looked at her like she just said something tragic. It's not silly to create, he said. It's the only way some people remember who they are. One morning, as the sun broke through the trees and reflected off the water, Ethan handed her his camera. Look through it, he said, nudging her gently. She hesitated, but then lifted it to her eyes, and for a brief second, the world shifted. Through his lens, she saw the light on the lake, the colors of the sky, and her own reflection in the viewfinder. Soft, glowing, alive. That's how I see you, he said, his voice low. Emily's breath caught. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, with no agenda, no pressure, just truth. She tried to push the feelings down, to remind herself that she was married, that this was Jason's brother. But every time she looked at Ethan, her heart betrayed her. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, a sense of being understood, noticed, wanted, and it felt so rare, so unfamiliar, it scared her. That night, Jason came home late again, barely offering her a tired nod before heading upstairs to sleep. She watched him disappear down the hall and felt the hollowness inside her grow. The next day, Ethan found her in the backyard, sitting under a tree with a cup of cold coffee in her hands. He sat beside her, close but careful. You okay? He asked. She didn't answer right away. I think I stopped being okay a long time ago, she said quietly. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened, and that meant more than any comforting words ever could. As the wind moved through the trees above them, Ethan reached out and brushed a leaf from her shoulder, his hand lingering for just a moment too long. Their eyes met, hers full of longing and fear, his full of something steadier, stronger. Emily, he whispered, and it sounded like a promise or a plea. She pulled away, standing quickly. We can't, she said, her voice shaking. You're his brother, I know, he replied, not moving. But that doesn't mean I don't feel what I feel. Her heart pounded as she walked back toward the house, tears pressing behind her eyes. She knew this was a line she couldn't cross, but deep inside, something had already crossed it. The way Ethan looked at her, the way he listened, the way she came alive around him, it wasn't something she could ignore anymore. It wasn't just temptation. It felt like a second chance at something she thought she'd lost forever. The sky was dark that morning, heavy with clouds that matched the weight pressing down on Emily's chest. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, and thunder rolled in the distance like something inside her was echoing back from the outside world. She hadn't slept. Her thoughts had twisted through the night like wind through bare branches, wild, restless, full of longing and guilt. She had always thought love was simple. You chose someone, you stayed faithful, you built a life. But now, she was standing in a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt completely empty on the inside. And then there was Ethan, the man who had become her storm and her calm all at once, Jason had flown out that morning for a legal conference in Seattle. He didn't kiss her goodbye, didn't ask if she needed anything. He simply said, "Don't forget to water the plants," and left. She stood at the window watching his car disappear down the street, not sure whether to cry or breathe a sigh of relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt free to feel what she'd been trying so hard to suppress. Ethan found her later that day, curled up on the couch, an old photo album open on her lap. One of the photos was of her and Jason, taken years ago on their honeymoon in Banff. They were smiling in the picture, holding hands, full of dreams and closeness. Emily touched the edge of the photo, her finger tracing the space between them. "He used to love me," she whispered, the words almost too painful to say aloud. Ethan sat beside her, saying nothing at first, but then, gently, he reached for her hand. "You deserve more than someone who used to love you," he said softly. His touch was warm, comforting, but not demanding. She leaned into him without meaning to, her head finding its way to his shoulder. For a moment, they sat like that, two people tangled in emotions they weren't supposed to feel, breathing the same quiet air. It was Ethan who pulled back first. "This isn't fair to you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want to be just another escape for you." Emily looked up at him, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "You're not an escape," she whispered. "You're the first thing that's felt real in a very long time." He exhaled slowly and stood, needing space, needing control. "We can't cross this line," he said. "Not like this." She nodded, even though every part of her wanted to reach for him and ask him to stay. "I know," she said quietly, "but that doesn't change how I feel." That night, she stood in the kitchen alone, staring at the glass of wine she didn't want to drink. She could still feel the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers. The worst part wasn't the guilt, it was the truth. She hadn't felt desired, seen, or truly known in years, and now she was standing at the edge of something that could destroy the life she had built, but could also awaken the woman she used to be. She walked into the living room, pulled out a blank canvas from the closet, and began to paint slowly, quietly, the way someone touches something fragile for the first time. It was messy and unfinished, but it was hers. She painted until the rain stopped, until the sky cleared, and until the ache in her chest felt less like heartbreak and more like something new trying to grow. But when she looked out the window and saw Ethan walking alone down the driveway with his duffel bag packed, her heart cracked open again. He was leaving, and she had no idea if she'd ever see him again. The house felt quiet without Ethan to quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your chest like a weight. After he left, Emily walked through each room slowly, like she was seeing it all for the first time. The walls felt bare, the furniture dull, and everything smelled like laundry, detergent, and memories. Jason was still away in Seattle, and she was alone, but strangely, she didn't feel afraid. For the first time in years, she had space to listen to herself. And what she heard wasn't guilt, it was clarity. Something had shifted inside her. The longing she'd been carrying wasn't about Ethan alone. It was about feeling alive again, feeling wanted, feeling like a woman who still had color in her soul, not just a role to play. That night, she sat by the window with a glass of wine, watching the lights flicker in neighboring homes. She wasn't crying, she wasn't breaking, she was becoming. And in that quiet space, she pulled out her paints again, paints she hadn't touched in almost a decade. Her brush moved slowly at first, uncertain, like she was remembering a language she once knew, but then it flowed. She didn't care if the strokes were perfect. They were hers. By the time morning came, the canvas was filled with color-warm golds, soft blues, streaks of fire orange across a stormy sky. It didn't mean anything specific, but it felt like her heart laid bare. Jason came home the next evening. He was tired, distracted, scrolling through emails before even putting down his suitcase. He barely noticed the painting propped against the wall. "You're painting again?" he asked, not unkindly, but with no real interest. "Yeah," Emily replied simply. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask what it meant. And in that moment, she knew they were done. There was nothing cruel between them, no big betrayal. Just emptiness. Two people who had grown so far apart they couldn't even recognize the distance anymore. "I want a separation," she said, her voice steady, not angry. Jason looked up, confused at first. "Are you serious?" She nodded. "We've been living separate lives for a long time. I'm just finally ready to admit it." He stared at her for a long time. Maybe he saw it too, that they were more roommates than lovers, more polite strangers than partners. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and said, "Okay." A week later, Emily moved into a small apartment downtown. It was nothing fancy, but it had light, big windows, a corner for her paints, and the sound of the city humming outside. She felt lonely sometimes, but it was an honest kind of lonely, not the aching emptiness she had felt beside someone who stopped choosing her. Then, one morning, a message blinked across her phone from Ethan. "Still here, still waiting, no pressure, just thinking of you." Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected anything. He had left gently, respectfully, without asking her to choose. But he hadn't let go of her either. Not fully. She stared at the screen for a long time, her fingers hovering. Then she typed back, "Me too. I'm ready to feel alive." That evening, she walked to the small art gallery around the corner and dropped off one of her paintings for submission. It wasn't just about Ethan. It was about finding herself again. But she also knew somewhere in the near future there would be another walk by the lake, another glass of wine, another quiet moment with the man who had looked at her like she mattered, and this time, she wouldn't pull away. She would choose what made her heart come alive. Like, share and subscribe to Echo Tales for more romantic, emotional stories that stay with you. Because every heart deserves a second chance.